Yes, we do.
We do actually. We do. We want to distract Paulette. We'll give Cecil a little bit to trim here, and we will go live. It's Thursday night, and we're happy to be spending time with all of y'all and each other. And it's May 20th, but there's plenty to talk about in the NFL. And first and foremost, and by the way, Cecil's out. Say congratulations, graduation wishes in his family. So I get to host, and because Cecil's out, you just got a big dose of me and Matt Waldman being self-indulgent. Indulgent, is that a word? Indulgent. You're going to see tonight, and hopefully a lot more often, on the Football Guys channel here. Chris Allen, you can follow him at Chris Allen FFWX. But let's talk about the big story here, gents. And I'll tee this up for you first, Matt, because it is your neck of the woods. And I know you know that if Jeff Schultz, from formerly Journal-Constitution, now The Athletic, is speaking, he's coming from somewhere. He's not just speculating. He's not just saying this is logical. So for folks who didn't see the article today, I'll run down the key points. Number one, the Falcons don't have enough money to sign their draft picks. And they've already restructured 4 contracts, and Dante Fowler took a pay cut. But still, there are only 2 options, sources tell Mr. Schultz, to get them to a point where they can sign their draft picks. And they need to do this before camp, obviously. One is Grady Jarrett. Grady Jarrett, their best player on defense. They would have to either restructure or sign him to an extension to lower his cap hit. Apparently, he has not been approached, or his agent, Todd France, has not even been approached about that yet. So a little late in the game if that's their plan. Julio Jones, potentially restructure. Schultz said that. Terry Fontenot doesn't want to put any more pain in the future. Matt Ryan already has a $48 million cap hit next year. So the answer is trading Julio Jones. Now, he goes over who might trade for Julio Jones. He mentions 5 teams: Baltimore, New England, Indianapolis, San Francisco, and most interestingly, the Chargers. Also, that Tennessee could have interest, but they're not in a great cap situation themselves. One of the other interesting things that he puts in here, and he says this very unequivocally, if you think them drafting Kyle Pitts was some sign that they're pushing the chips all in this year, that's silly. He used the word silly. He said they just saw Pitts as a special player, and that Justin Fields, they did not trust, I think that was the word he used, or did not feel confident, something to that effect, enough to use the 4th pick. And here we are, Matt. So in fantasy football, often, or even with all these prop bets, all this stuff that you can do, if you're skating to where the puck's going to be, yes, hockey's on my mind. The Penguins are playing right now. Don't tell me what the score is. If you skate to where the puck's going to be, then you can profit. How do you think you can skate to where the puck's going to be with this Julio Jones situation?
Well, I mean, I'm not one for betting, so I'll let someone else answer that from the standpoint of like prop bets. Because I really don't care about that. But from the standpoint of, and I'm plenty do, and that's great. But from the standpoint of just Atlanta, in terms of how that benefits you as a fantasy player, certainly you're looking at Pitts having an enhanced role right away. I mean, he may end up playing a lot of the same roles as what Julio Jones does, because they use Jones a lot in the slot with quick hitting routes off play action. And they're going to probably try and do that with Pitts when they move him inside. They'll also be able to use him outside on a lot of routes like Jones as well. I mean, because they can use slants with his size speed advantage to be able to handle cornerbacks. And then that also helps people who considered Frank Darby, who's basically going for free in rookie drafts. Because, after Julio Jones, certainly Ridley and Pitts are your 2 guys there. Hurst is, or Hayden Hurst is still going to be a factor as a tight end for sure. But then after that, Russell Gage is a slot guy that a lot of people who follow training camp reports will feel like he's going to be the next guy, but that's about as reliable as Ito Smith. I've seen enough of Russell Gage to tell you that he's just the wide receiver version of Ito Smith, a decent football player, but not a good fantasy option. Olamide Zaccheaus is an excellent deep threat, but he's probably a guy that doesn't really fit what they're looking for in terms of what they're going to put into their lineup and their rotation on a regular basis. So that leaves us, because he's a guy that can get deep, he can run after the catch, but they haven't used him as that open field guy as much as they've used him as a straight line kind of deep threat. So that kind of leaves us with Darby, who's the guy who can, he kind of looks to me like a Roddy White starter kit anyway, as someone who can be physical, who can win the timing routes, who can get deep off of play action. He gives you that outside complement so they can kick Pitts or Ridley inside when they want to. And then another guy to watch, this is very like below the radar, but I know we both know Alex Brown, who is the recruiter at Rice, and Austin Trammell, who basically outlifted Dylan Redunce at the combine at 181 pounds and played with something like 10 different quarterbacks during his career, who has a very impressive athletic profile. Alex said this guy very much has a Danny Amendola kind of skill set in terms of what he can do for you, quick, faster than you think, someone who's got reliable hands and physical. So as long as he can stay healthier than Amendola has, and he can make his way onto the roster here, he might be an interesting guy to watch in a couple of years here, especially as just kind of a slot option. So from an Atlanta standpoint, that's how I'd look at it. And then just to go quickly, San Francisco would be the best bet in terms of giving a young Trey Lance, a veteran receiver, who's experienced in Kyle Shanahan's offense, and that would be an opportunity to push the chips onto the table for the 49ers, who we talked about last year, where they really messed themselves up by not keeping Emmanuel Sanders from the standpoint offensively, because he was the only guy who could make, run routes in the middle of the field on the third and critical situations where you're going to face tight man coverage and you need to make the play. And Julio, they don't have a receiver who's going to make the play when they stick the best man on him. They've got a lot of good athletes who are budding guys, but other than Kittle, if you put Jones in there, Jones can be part-time with that whole rotation that they have, and it would be ideal because of what he could do to mentor the young receivers, help with the quarterback, knowing that offense, and give San Francisco, with that great offensive line and strong defense, a real push to once again be back into contention. So that's where I would be looking, without looking at the salary cap ramifications there.
Yeah, and it's perfectly you brought up Alex Brown, because I think I met him back in 2007 at the Texas versus the Nation game that Danny Amendola was at. Anyway, I just remember Amendola in that game looking like all the other guys were practicing and competing with each other, and Amendola was competing against some platonic ideal in his head, and you could just tell that he was different. He was a little different. All right, Chris, there's a lot here to tease apart, but what comes to your mind? What jumps to the forefront when you start to ponder in maybe a few weeks a reality where Julio Jones is not a Falcon?
I think the first is just the changing of the guard as we think of it with the Falcons offense. I mean, I know that even Matt Ryan, if he still stays on, but think about what we were looking at in terms of the Falcons offense over the last, even let's say like 7 to 8 years, if it wasn't Roddy White, if it wasn't, Julio, obviously. I mean, there were so many mainstays in that offense that we've enjoyed watching over the past 5 to 10 years, that seeing him go, it's almost like you have to pour one out. Shout out to Charles McDonald. I know a huge Atlanta Falcons fan. I know that he is going to be, I don't even want to, it's almost like I want to see what his timeline is going to look like if that were to happen. But at the same time, I don't, just because of, just the sadness that it's going to.
Today he said, Thomas Dimitroff, show yourself and answer for your crime.
Yeah, I could almost imagine like what it's going to look like for him and the number of Falcons fans, as they've had to say goodbye to so many of their great players Michael Vick. The list goes on and on. But the one thing that does come to mind if he were to leave is this basically, not to say it bails out, but at least gives some credence to the idea of Kyle Pitts now being taken where he's taken, regardless of if it's a dynasty situation, a redraft best ball situation. At this point, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around Kyle Pitts going where he's going, because I'm more of a linear thinker. It's more of a, if I've seen it happen before, or even if I can try and tease out a similar situation, then I can buy into this, the narrative that if Kyle Pitts was to hit, he's going to hit in a big way. It's going to be in year one. But in that offense, if it was going to be Julio, if it was going to be Ridley, it's going to be him. Mike Davis, even, we assume he's going to get some targets as well. Then it was hard for me to envision that path to Kyle Pitts in the 4th round, 5th round in some best ball drafts as of right now. So if that does happen, that instantly puts him into that conversation where a 20% target share is not out of the realm of possibility, where a lot of folks were already penciling him in for that level of targets almost right out the gate, even with Julio there. 16, 17%, no problem. 20%, possibly. But if Julio Jones leaves, all bets off the table. I mean, we're already talking about an offense that was top 5 in neutral passing rate over the past couple of seasons. I mean, Matt Ryan, regardless of what you think about him as a pocket passer, I mean, towards the top in terms of volume, passing attempts in the league, year in and year out. So this is a team that we know that we want to invest in, at least invest in that passing game. And just like Matt was saying earlier, if it's not any one of our, the top guys that are part of that offense, we could look at Zaccheaus, we could look at Russell Gage, we could look at any of the other ancillary players, because we know there's going to be volume there for any one of those guys to hit on a weekly basis. We were rushing to put any of those guys like Zaccheaus, Gage in our DFS lineups when Julio was out just this past season. So now, with a similar amount of targets to be distributed within that offense, Kyle Pitts now becomes that guy that we're probably going to want to draft. I mean, continue to draft. I can only imagine what his ADP is going to be if Julio Jones weren't to leave. I mean, if we're already taking him in the 4th, 5th round, dynasty drafts, he's going, I've seen 102, 103 in super.
I took him 1-1.
Yeah,
I traded 3 first-round picks to go up and get him in 1-1.
I figured you would be one of the people that would do that. I know, but I can see it now. Like that now it becomes easier for me to envision something like that happening. Should that volume of targets open up in an offense that we know that's going to continue to throw, and honestly, they won't have a choice.
Yeah,
it's not like this is something that they might want to do as an organization, where it's like, we have these pass catchers, we know what their ability is. We know that we can continue to just, continue to compete with the rest of the people within our division, because even if you don't think Carolina is a competitor, they're coming. I still think, even like Sam Darnold aside, I still think they have enough weapons in place in order to compete. The Bucs, same thing. I mean, we already know that they have to compete with them. New Orleans, we'll see. But either way, it's like, with their defense, with the way that they're situated right now, they don't have much of a choice regarding their passing situations. So the volume is going to be there. We already know Pitts is already at one of the most talented tight ends in the league. So now it's like, we have the situation, we have the talent, the opportunity would be there with Julio Jones out of the roster. So it's almost like it's like Dogecoin a couple of months ago. It's like to the moon, and we're not even going to bother looking back at it, because it's going to be nothing but target after target after target for Pitts moving forward. And I would love to see that happen, but I would much rather see him be able to develop with Julio Jones. But again, that's where we're going back to, we just have to pull one out. And I hope he's able to stay and they can figure something out. But if it doesn't, I'll be drafting Pitts more often, and I'll pay the premium, because I know there's going to be nothing but targets in that offense.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll say this. I mean, I think those are great points that Chris made. And one of the things is, I mean, right now with my projections, I have Julio Jones at a 26% target share for this offense if he plays in Atlanta right now. And then you give Ridley at about 22%. And that's to me, with the idea that Atlanta wants to run the ball more, but they're not going to be able to do it at the rate that they'd like to, with Arthur Smith's plans. So I have them at best at 44% run, 56% pass, which is probably, the maximum of what they're going to be able to do, because when you look at them last year, they were at 46 run, 53 pass, and they weren't all that successful with their offense. And then they were 37-63, over their 2-year average. So, that 2-year average is pretty pretty weak run to pass. But if they can move up a healthy 7%, even then, I had Kyle Pitts at about 7% of target share as a conservative estimate for him as a first-year player, because even though I think he's more, you can call him a pass catcher more than you call him a tight end, especially with Hurst still playing well last year, and they're going to allow to use Hurst with his hand on the turf, and probably allow, Pitts to move around a little bit. Like you said, if you remove 26, 27, 28% of your target share right there, I mean, it's all may not be going to Pitts, but certainly I would say at least half of it does. And and then at that point, you're still looking at a guy who's getting 15 to 18% of the target share, getting at least a 10% bump there from what you have, if you want to just look at it from a projection stats kind of number standpoint.
And I want to tease out some things here, and I'm going to go back over a few things, because this is a big deal. It's the biggest deal right now. And again, Jeff Schultz laid this out very step by step, and he specifically said he wanted to dispel some myths. And he, fact number 1, fact number 2, fact number 3, fact number 4. This is basically the bounds that the Falcons have to work within, and there's no path out of the maze except for probably, he said, I think the logical conclusion basically is they're going to trade Julio Jones. Really, the variable is, can they find a team that will take him with a $15 million price tag? But I think that the team will do that. So touch on some things both you said. First of all, Chris, I like how you led with, well, I want to believe in things I've seen before. But again, I'll just say, I'm going to be, out there in front of the parade here with Kyle Pitts. We've never seen a tight end go number 4. We've never seen a tight end be the first non-quarterback. So we're already seeing things we haven't seen before with Kyle Pitts. It's almost like if he doesn't continue to do things we haven't seen before, then he's falling below expectations. We'll see. But I think that that's where the median mean bar is, at least based on his entrance into the NFL. But as Matt will tell you, because it's important that Matt is here to be the wet blanket sometimes, because I get overexcited. But I do think that Kyle Pitts is going to be the kind of player that whatever the plan is for him, if he does what he was doing at Florida, then his opportunity is going to snowball. It'll be, production will beget opportunity, which will beget production, which will beget opportunity. So we'll see. I guess I'm just trying to say, if you want someone to give you the thumbs up on overpaying, whatever the standard is for Kyle Pitts, I'm your guy. Arthur Smith is an interesting name here, because what we're going to learn about Arthur Smith is, does he have a system? Remember, he was kind of a dark horse to become an offensive coordinator at the time that they promoted him. It was more for, I think, continuity for Marcus Mariota than anything else. He, former tight end coach, had smashing success. Now, he utilized the elements he had in Tennessee very well. Is he married to a system or a way of attacking defenses, or is he going to look at what he has in Atlanta and craft something around that, different kind of quarterback, etc.? He likes Pitts, obviously. They also still have Hayden Hurst. Something about this offense being a 2 tight end offense just kind of makes sense. But as you all said, the defense might not give them the opportunity to play the way they want to play. Either you're going to have Mike Davis getting like 300 carries or more, or you're going to have your 600, 650, or maybe even more pass attempts in this one. When you look at the pass rush and you look at the secondary, probably the pass attempts. And Dave Ragone is another name to bring up here. Passing game coordinator for the Bears last year. Oh, you gotta hold your nose. So, I don't know what we really have to work with there with Ragone. It's an interesting hire for Arthur Smith to bring in. Offensive line is another question here. Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, the 2 first-rounders from 2 years ago, little banged up rookie year. Maybe this line starts to come together. They still have to figure out left guard. But that's something else to think about. And so where this all circles around to, we've talked about the Falcon side of this a lot, Matt. Julio Jones is 32? Is that right? And we'll always think of Julio Jones and AJ Green together, because they came into the league together, and they've both been outstanding, like stellar players. AJ Green started a few years ago into that decline phase, and I'm certainly one of the people that wanted to believe it's just the injuries. He'll be back to AJ Green next year. Then he get hurt again. Next year, and then he got hurt again. Ooh, AJ Green isn't AJ Green anymore. We'll see in Arizona this year. is Julio Jones in the beginning of his decline phase, or would you at least play that side of this when it comes time to decide whether to draft Julio Jones or trade for Julio Jones in your dynasty league? Or do you think that we're getting too ahead because there's that idea of you would rather be a year early than a year late, but maybe with elite, like Hall of Fame level wide receivers, we'll stick with them to the very end. Which side of this are you on with Julio, Matt?
Well, I mean, for the past 3 years, what you've seen is at the beginning, he'd miss a series or actually miss a couple of plays. Then the next year, he'd miss a series. Then in recent years, he's missing quarters at a time, and he's still putting up massive production. So the ability's there, but the injury that he has, the foot and ankle or whatever he's been dealing with it's a chronic issue. It's something that he manages, which makes him a special player. In the same way that Curtis Martin managed his knee injuries and was still able to play at a high level back in the day with the New York Jets and New England Patriots, and he was a special player. So, guys like that have a different level of pain tolerance and an ability to win. I think the way that he runs routes, you're still seeing the bend, you're still seeing the acceleration, and it's not like he's just a size monster who wins that way. I mean, Matt Ryan doesn't throw him fade routes. So we know that it's all about the route running. It's still there. It's just the Falcons are leveraged, hedging their bets. They're at a point they're like, are we going to be on the hook with this guy? And then what does that mean for our future? I would think that if Grady Jarrett's in a position to be able to help them have one more year, if Atlanta really wants to keep him for one more year, and I think it would be smart, just because you're not putting all that pressure on Pitts, because as well as Florida used him, he hasn't played in an NFL offense. He hasn't played NFL defenses. There's going to be a jump. Listen, I love what I've seen from Kyle Pitts, and I'll give my wet blanket view a little bit here with that, which is, and it's, we'll call it a damp blanket more than a wet one with this particular one. But, the thing with this is that TJ Hawkinson is probably the best tight end I've seen, all around tight end I've seen in the past 5 to 7 years that I've been studying rookies. Kyle Pitts may be the better receiver, but he's not the best tight end. He doesn't have to be a top tight end, like inline guy, to get on the field right now, but he still has to make route adjustments that are going to be different and more complex. And the type of defenses he's going to face are going to force him to think a little bit more. And he's not going to be facing Alabama linebackers who are about 2 iterations away from NFL players, as good as people want to prop up Alabama's players, and they deserve, they're great athletes who are going to get better. But he's going to be facing guys who are going to be about 5 times smarter and savvier and as athletic as those Alabama linebackers that he was whipping, on the field, and other players, in terms of just with his sheer speed and with them lining it up in certain ways. And he certainly will have moments like that. But I think that having Julio in a position where you can keep the pressure off of Pitts and let him learn a little bit slower is probably the best thing. And if Jarrett's willing to, and Jarrett strikes me as a team player, because this is a guy who's basically the only man standing on that defense for a few years. I mean, you knew that was, teams tried to stop him, and they'd have a tough time stopping him. He's one of the best nose tackles in the league. So there's potential there that he could do this. But, again, if as a fantasy player, I think you can go one more year with him and go one more year to the well with him and be okay. But it gets riskier every year. And you remember, he's missing quarters at a time now, as opposed to missing just a play or two or a series. And that's progressed over the past 3 years. So the next step will be games. And this year might be that year. And with Atlanta wanting to consider getting rid of him, that may tell you that they think it's going to be games very soon.
Yeah. And it was last year. And certainly I can picture that. I think it was one of the Saints games where, he's coming back into the game in the fourth quarter and making a play and then hobbling off the field. Like he can still make a play, and then he can play for basically one play and has to go back to the sideline. And one last bow on this topic, Chris, before we turn the page to another big story today, or at least something in the fantasy world that sent ripples. Just as a fan, or just I don't want to say being selfish. I'm thinking of myself, and I think being selfish. I said Baltimore, New England, Indy, San Francisco, Chargers. Where would you be most excited to hear that Julio Jones was traded to?
I think it has to be San Francisco, like Matt outlined earlier, because we already know that at least we've seen them have the blueprint for success just within the past couple of seasons, and that was under Jimmy Garoppolo. They were basically 1 40-yard pass away from getting into the from winning the Super Bowl, and I think there's enough there, especially with the additions of Ayuk, Kittle being healthy, offensive line. I mean, Trey Sermon you add Trey Sermon on top of all of that, and there's a recipe for success there now with Trey Lance in the fold. So you bring Julio into that offense, you give those young receivers a chance to learn with one of the best route runners and receivers. From an athletic standpoint, and also just from a body profile standpoint, he can help teach them to be those physical type receivers that I think Deebo Samuel already has. He already has that physicality as a runner. Ayuk, I think he'll come along as well. But I think Julio can teach them how to, increase that their longevity within the league and keep them being more, savvy with their routes, savvy with their receptions, and being able to keep themselves healthy for a little bit longer. But either way, you now increase the opportunity for that entire offense by adding a guy like Julio. And also you pull along Trey Lance as well. I mean, you're making things so much easier for him than having let's say, George Kittle to rely on as being the more, the more advanced, or the most veteran receiver on that crew. So now it becomes just easier for the entire offense to operate. And we've already seen what Julio can do with Kyle Shanahan, because they've already, they've crossed paths before. So it just seems like it'd be a perfect marriage for Julio to once again operate in a system that he's familiar with. He gets to work with other receivers that we know are known commodities within the fantasy community. It's not like they're going to have to rely on Julio every single play in order to bring them back or will them into a win. They already have enough assets in place in order to keep pushing things along for their season. So I think it just works out along multiple facets that Julio can wind up at least thriving for fantasy purposes, because I think for a lot of dynasty owners that have been having Julio Jones sit on their roster, they've made their decision as to whether or not they're going to keep Julio on their squad for another 1, 2, 3 years, whenever he decides to hang him up, or they're going to sell him off or package him in a trade or something like that. That decision has most likely already been made for most of them. And I'm one of them. I already decided that he's going to be one of those guys that I'm just going to continue to hold on to him until he hangs him up. That's it. I'd rather just keep that, see if I can wind up getting at least fringe wide receiver 1 production out of him until there's nothing left. Because he's one of those good players that I just like having on my roster. Same thing with AJ Green. I'm just a sucker for, and also because I'm a Cincinnati fan. But I think there's enough there that I would just want to continue to invest in him, or at least hold on to him until there's just nothing left.
Me too.
Yeah, me too. That's how I manage my teams. And I think that's one of the fun things about fantasy football is you manage teams aligned with your values. And there are just certain players that are like, look, you're going to retire a member of the Sigmund Bloom fantasy team, whatever that means. And yes, I was like that with AJ Green too. I think the year after his second injury, I traded Robert Woods, then a second round pick, or Cortland Sutton, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, but that's it. We all have our flaws. Everyone who's played with me in a fantasy league knows my blind spots. One thing while we're talking about this, I hope that you don't have a blind spot for, is the Football Guys early bird discount. You want to support Football Guys, you want to support what we can do. Of course, Audible is free, and Football Guys media offerings continuing to expand. I saw Troy King in the chat room earlier. So many Football Guys stars. You can show your support. Get that early bird discount, and that's as low as the price is going to be all year. It's there. I don't know. I get back. I'm backwards.
It's a Vanna White kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She's still doing it. Isn't Vanna White still? I mean,
I think so.
When we were kids, she was out there turning the letters. And anyway, also, if you're here right now or you're watching this video on YouTube, like, comment on the video, including if you're in the chat room, comment on the video. We love all the chat room action too. Subscribe to the channel because that helps us in this dog eat dog YouTube social media stream world. So thank you, folks, always for your support and giving us this platform and the opportunity to serve you. Okay, Chris, we were talking about teams that want to run the ball, but things might not work out this year so that they can run the ball as much as they want. Detroit obviously comes to mind. Anthony Lynn. Really great series. Again, I'm going to mention the Athletic. No, Athletic's not a sponsor. Maybe they should be. A really great series going down with Chris Burke, who's been a fantastic NFL writer for a long time, and Nick Baumgardner, they're doing film review with Anthony Lynn. How awesome is that? And Anthony Lynn said about Jamal Williams, free agent signing this year, he said, Jamal is what I'd call a classic A back. I like to break the backs down into A and B. My A backs are normally my bigger backs. They can run between the tackles, block probably a little better than a B back. They can also run the perimeter. I can leave those guys in there for all three downs. My B back comes in. He's a guy that I want to use in space more. He's my speed and space guy. I feel like Jamal would be an outstanding A back. I like his energy, his pad level, the way he runs the football between the tackles. Now, Mike Florio, I don't know if you know this, Mike Florio, PFT, Pro Football Talk. They kind of ran with this and said, oh, Jamal Williams is going to be the lead back. Maybe a little stronger than I'd put it, but certainly, just like with this Julio Jones situation, like you've been put on notice, okay? Like a Julio Jones trade announced in principle tomorrow should not surprise you. So now thinks of Jamal Williams. He's also telling you a little bit about his framework of how he thinks of his backfield. Is there an overreaction here, Chris? Is this buy the dip on DeAndre Swift as this seeps into everyone's brain? Is there an underreaction? Maybe Mike Florio, PFT, whoever it was, wasn't putting it too strong. Or is this one of those things to say, hey, it's May 20th. Don't get too worked up about anything?
Might be it might be a combination of all of that. But if we look at how Jamal Williams was used on his way out of Green Bay, I think there's credence to that idea that coaches would see him as being a viable, not just a viable number two, but maybe even a possible 1B. I mean, I know that a lot of guys or people that had Aaron Jones on their roster last season, they were probably tearing out their hair when the Packers would get into scoring position, and then in would come Jamal Williams, and he would either at least take a few attempts, maybe bang in the touchdown, maybe not. It would probably turn into Aaron Rodgers passing it to Devontae Adams on a 1-yard touchdown pass, entirely possible. But at least Jamal Williams was being given the opportunity. And I was wondering about this actually when I saw the piece come out, and then of course the expected Twitter reaction afterwards. But I'm wondering if this is going to be Jamal Williams, like the archetype for his career is going to be just like late stage Adrian Peterson, where he's going to bounce from team to team, but coaches are going to love his work ethic. They're going to love his running style. They're going to love the fact that they can use him in all facets of the game. They just love that he's a grinder. They love his energy. They love everything about him. And we do too. I mean, if you listen to, you guys probably saw like his interviews and see him dancing on the field, and he's just a fun guy to watch and to listen to. So it just seems like he brings that energy where he can bounce from team to team and still put up enough production that we shouldn't just casually dismiss him, because this is not like when Kerryon Johnson went from Detroit over to the Eagles. This is not like when any other, like when Jordan Howard made his way back to the Eagles. I mean, this is a back last season who had, I want to say, at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the red zone attempts to Aaron Jones. I mean, they were just as easily going to replace or use Jamal Williams just as often as they would Aaron Jones. Also being used in the passing game as well. Now, Aaron Jones is the better receiving back. Of course, I'll give him that. But Jamal Williams was still getting an 8-9% target share out of the backfield as well. So he doesn't wind up forcing teams to tip their hand as to what their personnel packages are going to be when they put Jamal Williams out on the field. It's not like when I mentioned Adrian Peterson earlier, that it's just whenever they bring him out, they know it's going to be some sort of run play or he's in there to pass protect. Jamal Williams can be used anywhere on the field. So I can understand why a guy like Anthony Lynn, especially after seeing having to deal with Austin Eckler, Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly over the last couple of years, how he would love to have a guy like Jamal Williams where you could deploy him at any point during the game, at anywhere, any position of the field. So it makes sense to me that we should be looking for a guy like Jamal Williams towards the back end of drafts, because even if something doesn't happen to DeAndre Swift throughout the season, there should be enough opportunity for a guy like Jamal Williams in order to really make his value, especially where he's going at in drafts, where he's going, teens in terms of ADP. I mean, in terms of the round where you can take him, back end of drafts, essentially for free. So, I mean, we were doing the exact same thing with Jamal Williams in Green Bay. Now, while the situation might be worse in Detroit, I can still see a similar amount of opportunity for him when after he's moved from Green Bay over to Detroit.
And I think that if second half of the game, if they're trailing, I feel like that's Jamal Williams time as much as DeAndre Swift time. Chris, like a lightning round kind of thing, just really quick. Just looking at the Football Guys consensus rankings, and it's early. All of our takes are still in the oven. Okay, like we're not going to pull the souffle out of the oven and really commit on May 20th. But right now, DeAndre Swift is the 12th ranked running back in our consensus rankings. Okay, so just really quick, I'm going to tell you the guys below him, and you just give me an answer. Mm-hmm. Swift or number 13, Cam Akers?
Akers.
Okay. Swift or number 14, Antonio Gibson?
Gibson.
Okay, we're getting closer. Swift or number 15, Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
CEH, but I'm being stubborn about CEH.
Sure, and then that's when, you can see it. Swift or J.K. Dobbins?
I'll take Swift at that point.
So he's still in the right range.
Yeah.
I mean, in a classic snake draft, when he's up and you have a chance to take him, you're probably going to have to take him. He's probably not going to be there the next round unless you're picking near the turn. And this isn't necessarily something that torpedoes his value. And as I was saying in the chat room, they have an excellent offensive line. I just don't know how much they're going to be able to control, even the control line of scrimmage, how much they can control the scoreboard because of the condition that Matt Patricia left that defense. Okay, Matt, Jamal Williams has always been one of your favorites. And it's funny because I like to say that Jamal Williams is the type of running back that's catnip for coaches. Assignment sound, good blocker, good receiver, just exactly what you want if you're a coach. Maybe not if you're a fantasy player who wants someone who can break 80-yard touchdown runs or make three guys miss in the open field.
Yeah, the one time a year they do that.
Exactly. So at a time, he was catnip for Matt Waldman. So based on what you know about him, based on what you know about how NFL coaches, especially coaches like Anthony Lynn, handle their backfields, what do you take away from this?
Well, I think it's great for Jamal Williams because this is a guy I had rated one place ahead of Aaron Jones in my rankings pre-draft. And I've had Jamal on my RSP film room. He and I did a show together pre-draft, breaking down his tape. And, the big thing that's missing from his game is that elite speed, but he's gotten quicker each year. He was always very efficient as a runner and a much more powerful runner than DeAndre Swift. In fact, I'll go one step further and say I'll take J.K. Dobbins over Swift right now. But I like where Chris is going with that. I would have taken all those guys ahead of Swift that you mentioned. But here's the thing. You look at Anthony Lynn and really when he had his greatest success with the run game with the Chargers, if that was him during that time, I believe, Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler were kind of the A and B backs. And right. You can see that, Gordon had in 12 games, had 612 yards and 8 touchdowns, and also had another 42 receptions for nearly 300 yards. Now, Austin Eckler still outscored him fantasy-wise. Now, part of that is because he played 4 more games. He didn't outrush Gordon, but he was basically doubling Gordon's targets and was used much more as a receiver. Now, here's the thing. Austin Eckler is a better route runner than DeAndre Swift, at least coming out of school. Swift is known as a good receiver. He can catch well, but his route running needs a little bit of work. Williams was a better route runner than Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is a special talent as a pass catcher. And that's something that they haven't even really fully realized in Green Bay. But when you look at this, with that good offensive line, I think you've got to start. The starting point is Melvin Gordon circa, 2019. I would look at that Eckler-Gordon dynamic and play around with that projection of how they split the touches there And then you can throw in Jamar Jefferson as the Justin Jackson back, basically as the third guy in that equation. Because the thing about Williams too is that he's gotten better every year. That was why he kind of forced his way, into some of those situations in Green Bay the way that he did in terms of usage. He's always been a tough after contact runner. The issue is that you need a decent line for someone like him to really thrive, because you want to give him as much of a start downhill as possible into the crease where he can break tackles. Whereas, maybe a special player with special, change of direction quickness can make multiple guys miss and still get the yardage that Jamal Williams gets. Now, what I will say, in this regard is that when you look at DeAndre Swift, there are some holes in his game that need to be fixed. One of the things that he did is, at Georgia, he was a guy, he has fast top end speed, but needs a long runway to get there. Even though people see him as a high acceleration back, that's not the case. He gets caught from behind an awful lot. He needs a big runway to do that. He does have very good change of direction quickness. And at Georgia, he was more efficient than he was his first year. And that reason is that he was working with Adrian Peterson, not getting coached by him, but you could see I would call it the deleterious influence that Adrian Peterson had on DeAndre Swift. And I did a film room on this past year, because Peterson lives and dies with those big jump cuts. He's still doing it. The fact he can even still do it and get away with it at this level is amazing. But most backs can't do that. And DeAndre Swift started using that move in a way that he never used at Georgia. And I think he's got to work his way out of that habit, because if he doesn't, he's not going to be as efficient of a runner. And I think if they're looking at last year's tape as opposed to the college tape, it's why Anthony Lynn may be saying he's a B-back. We need to get him into space because he doesn't do as well, between the tackles. And that's what happens sometimes with early conclusions. So I would honestly say that DeAndre Swift's a guy that I would rather see fall a little bit, and I would take the prop on Williams a little bit more as the value.
And you bring up an important thing, like Anthony Lynn, by bringing up Gordon and Eckler, or even as Chris brought up, Eckler and the revolving door of backs last year, Anthony Lynn is coming out and telling us, and it makes sense, right? Based on what we know about Anthony Lynn, if you ask Anthony Lynn a question, he's just going to answer it. He's just going to come out and answer it. He's not going to try to obfuscate things. He's not going to try to put coach speak in some tautologies or something where he doesn't really say anything. He's just going to answer the question. And just that he's even sitting down with Chris and Nick at The Athletic and talking about these players. He has a template for what he wants to do. And as I was saying earlier about Arthur Smith, where we're going to see, does he have a template, or does he just create a template around what he has? Anthony Lynn we kind of understand, like he has a template and how he's going to deploy his backs. And it makes a lot of sense to think about things in terms of Gordon Eckler, which might not be a terrible thing for DeAndre Swift in PPR leagues, because as Matt pointed out, Eckler, even though some of it was because he played more games, outproduced him. And if DeAndre Swift, the other thing here is before they drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown, there was some talk that Swift could play the slot. They didn't really have a slot receiver. Maybe you still look into that, or the idea of where are these targets going to go? Because Jared Goff's going to have to throw the ball like 550, 600 times. TJ Hawkinson, you could pencil in for 120, 130 targets, which you probably should, which means Hawkinson should be in that next tier after the top four. I'm saying four. You can say top three. And then St. Brown's interesting. I know that asking any rookie to catch 80 balls is a lot, but again, chop it up. Well, maybe it's Swift that catches 80 balls. And maybe it's Swift that, like I was talking about with Pitts, he creates his own opportunity because Lynn, as Matt was saying, has him pegged. Like, get him out in space. That's where he's going to shine more than he will running between the tackles. So it might not be a bad outcome for Swift. And it's going to be interesting, but I appreciate that Anthony Lynn is out there just coming right out and telling us this. And it's yet another thing to watch. More food for thought as we are in May. And by the way, I want to mention something really quickly because we were talking about San Francisco. Not a lot coming out of rookie mini camps to hang our hat on. But one thing I did notice is that Matt Mayoko, who is never one to get carried away, like me, for instance, said Elijah Mitchell looked really good in rookie mini camp, and he could be the third down back as early as this year. So something to think about, because he's basically just has to show that he can block and he can be that guy. Because who else on that roster is equipped as a third back? You're smiling, Matt. What are you thinking?
Jermichael Hasty, but beat reporters like speed, and he has speed. He's that speed profile guy, and we're not even hitting anybody yet. So I can understand why Matt Mayoko is probably impressed with that right now. And he's a venerable guy, but again, even the venerable guys look at that and go, "Ooh, fast guys in shorts," and they get kind of excited about that.
Sure. And Shanahan going out and getting his guys is interesting.
Sure.
Of course, Trey Sermon being the headliner here. Those were the two big stories from today, and it's been kind of quiet otherwise. I mean, we could talk about Tim Tebow. We don't have to talk about Tim Tebow, do we? Are you guys okay if we don't talk about Tim Tebow?
Oh, I'm good.
Yeah. Exactly. There's Aaron Rodgers. Is there even an Aaron Rodgers update? I don't know. The latest I saw, the needle's moving a little more towards he's going to maybe stay. Yeah, right. We'll see. Well, Good. I'll leave that for Cecil. It's like, so we have about 10, 15 minutes left to fill. I guess I could just throw it open. I'm kind of on the couch mode and thinking off the rails, but we won't go off the rails. It's Thursday night. I guess I'll toss this one to you, Chris. You saw the Lane Johnson today. Make it timely. It was full go for the offseason program. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the Eagles really are content to have Jalen Hurts have a prove-it year, but that's where they've ended up. We've heard that, they were talking about maybe moving up to number 3 if they thought they could get Zach Wilson. Not really sure how comfortable they are with this, but maybe they should be more comfortable than they are, because one of the things that Jalen Hurts is going to get is an offensive line that doesn't look at all like the one he was playing behind last year, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to get Lane Johnson. Was there anybody even healthy at the end of the year on that offensive line?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, we can look at Dallas and Philadelphia as two teams that the offensive lines they're going to have this year, at least as long as everyone stays healthy, are entirely different and in a good way than the ones they had last year. And then that in turn affects how you're looking at guys like Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith and Jalen Reagor and Miles Sanders. We'll see about Zach Ertz. That's another story, that there's potentially another shoe to drop, but we haven't heard much about that lately. Are we sleeping on Hurts? Are we sleeping on the Eagles offense as one to show great improvements? What's your temperature right now check on Hurts and on the Eagles for 2021?
All systems go. I mean, for the Eagles in 2021, I think that, as you've been saying for years, teams, they can't lie through the draft. They can't lie with their money. And if they had gone out and drafted a quarterback, it didn't even have to be one of the top quarterbacks. Even if they had gone out and gotten, let's say, like Kellen Mond or something like that, like later on the very next day, they didn't do that. What did they do? They draft a wide receiver right out the gate in Devonta Smith, turn around, they draft an offensive lineman. They get Landon Dickerson shortly after that. Love it. It's the same. We're already talking about Miami making all the right moves for Tua, getting Jalen Waddle, also picking up an offensive lineman as well. It seems like there are shades of what these other teams have gone around and done in order to build around their quarterbacks. The Jets going out and they got Michael Carter. They go out and get Elijah Moore. They also wind up picking up an offensive lineman. They trade up to get an offensive lineman, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So it's like these other teams have gone around and through the draft picked up assets to improve the current state of their offense, not what they want it to be later on down the line with some other quarterback in charge, with what they have right now. The Jets with Zach Wilson, the Dolphins with Tua, and then, of course, the Eagles with Philadelphia. So we should view the Eagles similarly. I know that it's that organization, we looked at it as a complete dumpster fire, whether from, Howie to their previous coaching regime, to the whole Carson Wentz saga, to all of that. But if you just look at what they've done through free agency and the draft, this is a team to me that looks like they're ready to put Jalen Hurts into it as their guy. And after, what was it, that stretch of 5 or 6 games down the stretch of last season, he showed them that he's at least up to the challenge. And it's not like they put him on notice and grabbed another quarterback. It's not like the Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love situation where it's like, hey, we've got a guy that we can think come in right behind you if things aren't looking so great. No. It's just they've invested in Jalen. They've invested in this current offense. And with what he was capable of showing, even when things were completely down for the Eagles, he was capable of showing us that he can lead this offense and lead it well. I mean, QB1 like type potential for Hurts, I think, in like, especially with the way that their offensive line is set up, their offense, like the skill position players now are set up where we don't have to worry about who's going to be the second receiver, third receiver. I mean, we know what this team is capable of. So I do think that Jalen Hurts is set up for success, and he's one of those guys that if it's not in best ball, it's definitely from a dynasty perspective that I'll continue to invest in like from now, because I think his 2021 outlook is very bright. And then over the next few years, with the way that this team is building around him, I think he'll continue to be one of those quarterbacks and that offense in general that we'll continue to want to invest in. Just looking at the other teams in that division, right. How else are they going to keep up with Dak Prescott? How else are they going to keep up with Washington, who we think is going to be at least a very fun offense? I mean, to watch, and their defense is one of the best in the league. So how else are they going to keep up with the rest of the NFC East unless they continue to let Jalen Hurts run that offense? I don't see how they can do it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to those shootouts. Fitzpatrick versus Prescott, Hurts in this offense, hopefully can rise to that level. And I think you bring up a good point mentioning Miami and the idea that for Tua and for Hurts, there are no excuses now. Mm-hmm. They've given them the surroundings, and it's something that I think the Giants also tried to do, but they didn't do the offensive line part, where they brought in Kenny Golladay, they drafted Kadarius Toney. I don't know if you're going to get a clear picture of Daniel Jones, but I think you're going to get a clear picture of Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, and why grouping those two teams together makes sense is that Miami has 2 first-round picks next year. Mm-hmm. If Carson Wentz plays 12 games, Philly will have 3. So both teams are situated to have the capital to go get their quarterback if what they find out after surrounding their quarterbacks with talent this year that they just aren't the guys. But Matt, I'm going to ask you, because you already, before Jalen Hurts played a down, had a pretty big file in your brain on him based on that file where you started with him and what we saw last year. And then again, factoring in the way this offense should improve. Where are you at on Hurts right now?
I agree with Chris that this is that they're giving him the shot. They're giving him the extended opportunity to play. Last year, he played well, especially off script in situations where he didn't have a line to really support a lot of the plays that he needed to make. From a pocket, because he didn't have much of a pocket. But he handled it better than what Carson Wentz was doing. Carson Wentz had a meltdown pretty much, at that point. So now they're going to an offense that, as Fran Duffy mentioned, to me, about a month ago, the offense they had last year, they got Jalen Reagor. They called Gary Patterson up at TCU and said, what do you think of him? And he said, well, we misused him. We used him as kind of an above the rim pass catcher, kind of downfield contested player. And then the Eagles promptly used him that way last year and misused him. But now Nick Sirianni's coming to, is going to be the man there. And pretty much from what I've heard from Fran, that they're going to use him the way that they probably should have used him, as a quick hitting pass catcher over the middle, short, the quick game, space, that type of thing. And that would be nice. That leaves Devonta Smith to probably play that Alshon Jeffrey-esque / name the 5 receivers they've drafted over the past 5 years after the 5th round, who are 160-pound sopping wet and can fly, but can't seem to catch or run a route, at the level that they need to be able to run them for the NFL. And Smith is a guy who I think is their enhanced bet to say, we couldn't find a Paul Richardson type, Mike Wallace type in the late rounds. Let's get one in the earlier rounds who we think can be more reliable and maybe even give us more than just, that speedster role, but he's going to have to play that. So, giving him a bigger investment in the interior offensive line is great. Especially a guy like Dickerson, who is, obviously, to me, drafting a center, a guy who can play center or guard, really, but anybody who can play, drafting the interior line and getting that sorted out is so vital. And so the fact that they address that early is good. And that's going to help because defenses are going to throw more at Hurts that he hasn't seen yet. Because as we know, the first 8 to 12 games, defenses are playing their game plan against established talents, other players that they already know. Then after they get about 4 to 6 weeks of film, they start saying, okay, what are our best bets from what we've seen that we think we can exploit Jalen Hurts? What can we do against him? And they'll throw a few wrinkles. They're not going to throw the whole thing at him because they do that, they could screw up massively, and they're going to end up having holes elsewhere that can be exploited. So they pick a select number of things, and each team does that until it becomes a pattern, like Josh Allen can't handle zone coverage, or Baker Mayfield, if you rush high in the pocket and force him to step up, he won't do it. There are things like that they won't be able to do every week necessarily, but enough to say, we know how to stop you in key situations, and if we can do it, we can force you to make mistakes. Well, this period of time is going to be that opportunity to see how Hurts grows through that. Will he be able to adjust and say, yeah, you can try throwing that mess at me, I'm going to be able to handle it, or no, that's a problem. If the best case scenario for him, and I'd say it's like probably beyond realism, is Dak Prescott. But I'd say the mid-tier version, or maybe the mid-tier plus version, is kind of a plus version of David Garrard, who was a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback with the Jaguars, someone who could move, has the power that Garrard had as a runner, who could throw very well deep, could buy time, but also win from the pocket when you needed him to, as long as the pocket was decent enough. So I'd say, of course, I think they saw enough from him, probably both on and off the field, to feel comfortable about saying this could be our guy, especially when you look at Carson Wentz, because I think Carson Wentz for a long time has been overrated. And I certainly have talked about that for years, and that this is a guy that, literally you just never knew what you were going to get as a downfield thrower. And they adjusted their entire offense to say, we know what he did at North Dakota State, he's not going to be able to do at the pro level, and mechanically he's not even sound. So let's adjust the offense so that we can hide that and get the most out of him. I think with Hurts, the biggest issue is the more he invests in the play, the more stubborn he gets about trying to complete something and make something happen. So we'll see if he can overcome that, and whether that was just an immaturity flaw or a part of his game where, like Peyton Manning's impatient. Very rarely would you see that happen. But when a defense could say, you know what, we're going to, like the Seahawks when they killed the Broncos, they played on Peyton Manning's impatience and said, you're going to get tired of Julius Thomas dropping the football when Bobby Wagner and company just nail him, because we know he can't catch against contact. And then Peyton's going to get impatient and throw deep and make mistakes. And that's exactly but that's the Legion of Boom, and they get away with that, and that's why you don't see that with Peyton so much, or you didn't see it with Peyton so much. But with Hurts, I think more defenses are going to be able to exploit him in certain ways. We'll see how he overcomes it. But the way you guys both stated it, where they're setting themselves up, it's a perfect situation to give him an extended audition.
Yeah, and all these interrelated stories too, because you mentioned Carson Wentz, another bounce back candidate with Frank Reich, Nick Sirianni coming over from Indy. All these wonderful interrelated stories is what keeps this so stimulating, and we'd love to share everything that slants through our brains with each other and with you out there, folks. Great stuff in the chat room. By the way, real quick, Santos Carrion shows up to say, just checking in to say I bought the post-draft RSP, and I think I won my rebuild. Fire emoji. So, folks, yeah, and if you're listening to this conversation, this interests you, and you don't know about the RSP, Matt Waldman RSP, mattwaldman.com. Check that out. Footballguys.com. Check that out. Chris Allen, FFWX. Check that out. Great to have Chris here. We'll be seeing a lot more of Chris, and hopefully a lot more of you out there, folks. We love you so much. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, and let's enjoy the ride. As always here, it's always fun with you.